Hello, everyone. The reason why you're all here today is to help you understand how to decrease the cost of your observability solution by building with open source. And we'll talk a little about DoubleCloud in the process. So let's introduce ourselves. Natalia?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I'm COO of DoubleCloud. I think the reason why I'm here, I obviously wanted to ask some tough questions to our dearest Adam. And one of the reasons for that, I've spent several years in the observability market, and I received, when I was there, quite a lot of hard questions from CTOs. And now I want to ask them, Adam, and see what he answers.
Appreciate that, Natalia. I'm Adam Jennings. I'm a senior solutions architect here at DoubleCloud. We've got a couple of master's degrees, and I've been working with customers for the past dozen years or so, moving large amounts of data between sources and destinations. So not quite the observability space, but really adjacent to it. So I'm glad you're here with me today, Natalia.
Good. And DoubleCloud is the platform that helps you build sub-second analytics end-to-end with open source technologies that are managed, meaning you're not thinking about security or managing your infrastructure, but you just do what you love doing, coding.
Awesome. So why do we need an observability platform? So, at the end of the day, it's for better end user customer experience, right? So whether that's internal customers, external customers, your customer facing, or it's an internal stakeholder, you want to make sure that you have stable uptime and performance of your applications, of your infrastructure, and so that you can quickly resolve issues and be quick with your troubleshooting. So you learn your system, so you know where those breakpoints are, you know exactly where to go, leveraging the tools of the logs, the metrics, and your traces.
So I'm sure everybody knows already, but obviously the rise of observability happened with the rise of the cloud infrastructure. The amount of data grows exponentially. And this is when you need some different solutions, because just logging, how it was in monitoring, is no longer enough. But this also raises quite a lot of interesting questions about the cost, about the performance of the solutions, and so on.
Exactly. So we'll go ahead and get into that first question then.
Yeah. So first question is the following. So Adam, I received quite a lot in the past customers who were asking me, if I invest in observability, it won't happen right now. And by the way, why should I invest and buy the solution? Actually, I think it's better to build it with my own team. And for me, it was always like, I couldn't understand this, why would you go and build it with your own team if you can buy and immediately you have it, and it seems like a cheaper solution. So buy or build. Should a CTO invest into observability, or should the CTO actually have the team build it?
I think it depends on a lot of factors here, and here's just some of them on the screen. If you build it, you may save costs on that commercial software, but you're going to have headcount costs, right? So, sometimes those kind of even out. You leverage industry standards if you build them using some open source tools, right? If you just build some scripts internally and do some documentation internally, you probably won't leverage those standards. But if you leverage prominent open source products, you will have those de facto or those industry standards. I mean, take DBT, for example. I mean, it came out of almost out of nowhere, and now everybody seems to be using DBT. That's just one example of leveraging those industry standards. And so you can go, a quick Google search and find, whatever you needed. The downside is if you're not looking at, some of those industry leading open source technologies, maybe the documentation isn't there. Maybe you don't have support contracts built in. Whereas if you go to the buy side, you do have those documentation, you do have that support, because you're paying for that as part of the cost of buying that software from another vendor. So it's off the shelf, built for purpose when you buy. And so what can you do to merge those two together? And I think that's what we've just discovered here at DoubleCloud, is to build with buy, right? So, we're going to build it on some awesome open source technology. We're going to help you decrease your time to value by building on those standards, letting it be, that community driven. Hey, I need an answer about ClickHouse. I can go to Google and type it in, and I'm going to find an answer. But if you don't find the answer, you have us as support. And so I think, this build with buy model, I think, is really the best of both worlds. You get the time to value with buy, but you get some of the the better features of the build.
Okay, so this sounds interesting. And I think,
so,
yeah, we did some calculation, right?
yeah, we did some calculations here, just to price out, using something like a Datadog here on the right, or, open source with ours on the left. And, because of the way that we manage your logs, we keep the hot logs on SSD, and everything else goes to object storage. And that's where you get that $40 a month, so it makes it cheap to retain those logs in S3, so that if you do need to go back and do some type of analysis later on, you have that. And then ingestion and storage, we're not gonna charge you for the ingestion. It's just getting the data in. If you use our transfer service, there's some calculations there, but if you're delivering it directly to our managed ClickHouse, that's just wherever, bandwidth, network bandwidth. Whereas on the right with Datadog, you can see the costs start adding up when you start adding, gigabytes and terabytes of logs, and then, dollars per ingestion and for indexing.
Okay, and we didn't even take more expensive examples from the market. So we took what's popular there, and just it was interesting to look in the pricing here.
Exactly. I mean, pricing isn't the only thing, right? I mean, obviously that is a concern, especially in today's market. But at the same time, ease of use and reliability and standardizations, and there's a lot of companies out there using ClickHouse for their observability solutions.
Okay, so now I'm moving to my next question. So why does it make sense to stick to open source? And the reason I'm asking, again, everybody in the observability space for some time was talking about open telemetry. Isn't open telemetry enough? Why should I think about open source technology to build my observability solution?
Well, if you look here, this is I put a non-comprehensive list of the open source tooling that's available for logs, metrics, and traces. You see open telemetry across the top there. And so it is trying to be that standard, that one standard for, across the whole observability space. But it's still relatively new. There's some big players behind it. So I'm not counting it out. That's why it's number one on there. But at the same time, there's plenty of other established players in the market that are open source, open standard, great to go to their website, and grab some quick documentation and move that data in. So open telemetry also has, right now, because it's so new, it doesn't have all the syncs needed. So a lot of the steps to use open telemetry are double hops. So you get some data out of, your source system, drop it to vector, and then vector ends up dropping it into something like ClickHouse or whatever your destination is. So it adds a little complexity to your model. Whereas you can try to streamline that with something like an open source version of what we do, or what Grafana has done, what they call it their LGTM stack, right? So it's Loki, Grafana, Mimir, and Tempo. And so it's basically building that again. We use Vector internally, we use Prometheus internally, we use Jaeger internally. And so it's kind of that same philosophy, but using a different tool chain.
Okay, moving to the next question. So open source is clear. Then the question is, why should I bother about managed open source? And because I received these questions already quite some time, what exactly managed mean in this case? Do you do anything for me, or what does it mean?
Yeah. So when we talk about managing the open source projects, you can look here on this screen. It's our basic architecture diagram. And you see the managed data warehouse of ClickHouse in the middle there, and managed Kafka. And when we manage it, we're going to say, hey, we're going to spin up the infrastructure behind the scenes. You focus on running your applications on it, connecting to it, you're setting up users, doing those kind of things, doing the actual day-to-day, and not having to worry about the infrastructure. And so we'll take that off your plate. We'll include backups and reliability and support teams behind the scenes to make sure that you can focus on your data and not have to worry about the infrastructure. And then when you add in our transfer service, which a lot of those are based on open source Airbyte, then that helps you, get that data in, whether it's observability data or not. And then we have our visualization tool on the other side to help you visualize that. And we have native integrations with a few different products, and namely Prometheus for this talk, and then obviously ClickHouse. And we're open sourcing that as well. And so we're really just trying to say, hey, here's an open source opinionated data stack that you can take with us. Yes, because we're going to take the management from you, but you're not locked into us.
And basically, you're saying I don't need to think about support. So this is one of the biggest problems that exist with open source. You kind of need to find it if something goes wrong.
Yes, if something goes wrong, now you're stuck, jumping on forums or Slack channels trying to find it. Instead, you have a finger to point at if something goes wrong.
Got it. Okay, and one of the things you mentioned to me earlier is that you talked about hybrid storage. So again, if we're going back to this logging example in the beginning, so because of data grows exponentially in the cloud, and specifically it's the amount of logs, so the pricing for logging can go up to millions actually. And I think in 2023, pay millions for logs, which is kind of a standard for every business already, or in any data. It's ridiculous. So tell me more about hybrid storage and why is it of interest for example, if I'm a CTO of some business, so how it impacts my logging costs.
Okay, and I think that's another reason why you go with us as a managed, your managed ClickHouse provider of this open source tooling, because every time you spin up a new cluster with us, we automatically provision an S3 bucket. And so you have that object storage sitting there, and you just decide whether you want to use it or not. And, I think in the log situation where most of your analysis is done in the last, a couple days, maybe a week's worth of data, but maybe you want to retain some of that longer term, then, you start offloading that to object storage. And what we've done is re-leverage some systems already available in ClickHouse. Basically, time to live is, a function that's available in ClickHouse, and you can move it between disks and things like that. And so what we did is said, hey, let's move that to object storage after a certain time frame. So you set that on a per table basis. And in this case, for your logging tables, you move that over to S3. Now, what that does, it does take a little longer to query. So that's why you don't want those very first dashboards to hit S3. You want it to hit the SSD. But what you end up doing is you're greatly reducing the cost. So instead of paying, SSD pricing per terabyte, now you're paying object storage pricing per terabyte. And the way that we set it up makes it super efficient to use. Like I said, it's a couple extra lines. Your table, you can alter a table once you already have it created. Add the ability to move that older data over to object storage. And then once it's accessed a single time, now it's cached in memory on the SSD. So now you're ready to go. So if you have repeat queries, they will be almost as fast as native SSD storage.
Okay, technically okay, but tell me more about pricing then.
All right, well then pricing. Let's just jump to this slide. So with S3, you can see that I highlighted the two boxes there. About 1/8 of the cost for the storage piece, if you leverage something like hybrid storage, because now you're putting that data over on the object storage. So it makes it cheaper to run and more cost effective, while still giving you the ability to do that historical look back. If you notice an anomaly now that, hey, maybe I want to see if that ever happened in the past, you can go back and look and not be worried about cost so much, because you can retain that data.
Okay, good. So you kind of answered all my questions about logging that I had. So I see the principles around open source, around how you can decrease the pricing significantly. And I guess if you were using ClickHouse for logging, where you win is in terms of performance, because it's the fastest database out there for
Exactly.
this kind of data. Okay, now the question is about metrics. So the reason I wanted to ask, when we're thinking about observability, there are like three pieces. One of this is metrics. Once I received a question from a company, a very well-known company in retail, who were listening to my pitch about no vendor lock and so on. They're like, Okay, but you know what? The moment that there are dashboards, this is the best vendor lock ever, because the moment that somebody invested weeks of time to create like perfect dashboards, it's extremely hard to leave the vendor. So what you would recommend to think about in terms of dashboarding tools, so that I'm not vendor lock, and like what is there for that?
Yeah, so we offer our visualization service here. If you look here on this GIF that's scrolling through, hopefully you'll be able to see it on your end. Give it a second here. It's creating the connection. And when it creates the connection, you can see that we can connect to directly to a couple different endpoints. And one of those is Prometheus. So our visualization tool works directly with Prometheus. So you can connect in if that's you're using for your metrics. So, and we do that internally. So that's one of the reasons that, that's available. But we make it available to our customers as well. And so you can access file storage, ClickHouse, MySQL, BigQuery, and a couple others. And it's part of the GIF, but it's not showing very well on my screen right now. So, it just makes it easy to get started with point and click type of interface that's serverless, that you don't have to mess with. You just go in, you set up your connection, you create your dashboards, and you start building your dashboards using, using our documented chart types. But say, for instance, you're a Grafana user, we definitely, because we're leveraging open source ClickHouse, you can use the official driver. Internally, we've built our own driver. So you'll see that this is more Splunk looking query versus, something else on the market. But, it's still great to be able to say, hey, I'm a Grafana user. My users are power users of Grafana. They know how to create dashboards quickly. I want to stick with Grafana. Sure, you can do that. We'll help you get that set up. We'll help you get connected in.
Okay, very good.
So, I throughout the talk, I've talked a little bit about our stack on the left here. And so, for logging, we are using Vector and Telegraph. For metrics, we are using Prometheus. For tracing, we are using Jaeger. We're using both our visualization tool and Grafana for different teams. Obviously we're using our managed ClickHouse, dropping some data in Kafka, and then using our transfer service to move data from Kafka to ClickHouse. The way that we've architected it, we do have the ability in ClickHouse to directly use the Kafka table engine. So if you want to connect directly from our managed Kafka to our managed ClickHouse, you can do that as well without adding the transfer step in there. Really, that's what we're dog fooding to make sure that all of our services work well together. And on the right, I just wanted to highlight, that there's, we have a partner with Querian. They've taken, the idea of let's make ClickHouse the data warehouse for all this observability data. And then there's a couple other companies out there. One's called Signaz that does like an APM solution based on ClickHouse. And then, feel free to, in your spare time, to go look at the different blogs that have been out there from Cloudflare, eBay, and Uber, where they talk about how they've switched to using ClickHouse as the base of their logging solution. A lot of them, I think, switched from the Elk stack. Uber said they saved half their cost, and Cloudflare had a 8 times reduction in CPU memory footprint, and we're able to have more end user queries by leveraging ClickHouse. I think there's something cool that Cloudflare said, Elasticsearch is great for full text search, and ClickHouse is great for analytics. And we all know that ClickHouse is great for analytics.
That's why we're using it, right? Ourselves.
Exactly. So with that, any questions?
So if you have right now the questions, please drop them into the window, or if you will have your questions later on, please don't hesitate to join our Slack. So there are quite a lot of customers sitting there, and there are also our solution architects sitting there, so, and our product team as well. So anybody can answer your questions pretty fast. And in the meantime, Adam, maybe one last question from me. So give me their ideal architecture. I want to start tomorrow. How do I build my metrics? How do I build my logs management solution? Like how architecture looks like?
Yep. Yeah, so I'll skip this slide. There's a couple of questions on around the same topic. So the one that I see here is, how do I start my observability solution if I don't have one? And I say, start with one piece of it, right? And so that's when I drop into these architectures here. Start with one piece. Say, hey, I'm gonna work on my logging solution first, and don't try to bite it all off at once. If you're not doing anything today, something is better than nothing. So start with your logs. In our case. Both our Kubernetes and our EC2 instances have Vector installed. We push that to Kafka, use our transfer service, drop it over to ClickHouse, and then depending on the team, they either query it with our visualization tool or with Grafana with that plugin that I mentioned earlier. And so that's, I think, the way to, hey, let's just start deploying this as part of our CI/CD pipeline. Let's get Vector on our instances out there. And then the same thing for metrics. So, we have a Prometheus endpoint and Telegraph endpoints, drop those into EKS and Prometheus, and then we pick them up with the Alert Manager, and then visualize those as well, both in Grafana and our web UI.
Good, thank you. So let's go to the questions from the audience.
Yep, I see another one here. There was a couple around that same starting your observability solution. So I'll skip those other ones that are related to that. There's another one here. How exactly is DoubleCloud offering managed ClickHouse and Kafka at such a cheap price, even though it is much quicker and processing more data as compared to its competitors? Do you want to answer that pricing one, or do you want me to?
So go ahead, Adam. I'm curious to hear the answer from an unbiased solution architect who's thinking more about those solutions than anything else.
I think we're trying to streamline the processing costs, and we're gonna do a little bit of markup, but we know it's based on open source. So we're gonna recoup our costs, but we want to offer you a product that makes sense for you, and you don't have to spend hundreds of $1,000s just to get a data solution, right? So we want to help with that end-to-end data pipeline, help businesses discover the value of their data.
And I think it's the value of open source, right? So there is this is how this is the whole difference from proprietary world, where in proprietary world you can grow the pricing to unlimited because it's your product, but you also have a huge R&D that cost a lot. And in open source, the R&D is also huge, even more. But because it's a community-driven story, the company doesn't bear this cost on them.
Exactly. Leverage the power of the community, right? So, there's a saying, I don't know if it's popular all over the world, but in the US, it's a rising tide lifts all boats. And so, let's help each other out with some of those open source tooling and make them the de facto standards so that we can all, better process our data.
Well, there is another question. How long would the solution take to set up if I wanted to start?
I'm going to say with the default answer, it depends, right? It depends on how much dev time you want to devote to installing those agents, getting the, everything, the infrastructure behind the actual logging metrics and traces set up. On our side to set up, ClickHouse cluster in a couple of minutes. So you log in, the right-hand side, the QR code right now. If you scan it, you sign in, you get the additional starting credits. You go to the cluster page, hit the drop down for ClickHouse, choose your region, choose your size, gives you a little pricing thing on the right-hand side, the same one that I showed earlier, and then hit create cluster. In a couple of minutes, you have a ClickHouse cluster up and running, and we give you all the different connection strings that you can connect to it, including the Play UI, so you can just jump in and hit open, and it opens a new tab, and you can be right in your ClickHouse cluster, right in the browser. You don't have to install an IDE or any SQL editor. So super fast on the ClickHouse side and our managed side. What takes longer is actually getting the agents and infrastructure built to build those pipelines to move that data. But feel free, I'll use the left QR code, book a meeting or demo, and we'll talk more about it, and we'll help you solution your observability solution.
Any other questions? We have another question.
Okay.
That's, I think, for you, Adam, as well.
It says, what are the effective replicas and shards on a data cluster? So when you in our UI, if you drag the number of shards over, or click on the different number of replicas, you'll see on the pricing changes, right? Because we're spinning up a new machine for every replica and every cluster, or every shard, excuse me. But what the benefit of that is, you get higher throughputs with more shards. So you put a third of the data on 3 different shards. You have higher write speed, higher read speed. At the front end of each of our clusters, we have a load balancer. So we'll do a round robin load balancing. So you'll hit a third of the queries, should hit each of the replicas, or the shards, excuse me. And then when you talk about replicas, that's a full copy of the data onto another replica. So if you have typical scenario that I see is 2 replicas and 3 shards. So you'll have 6 machines total. Each machine will have a third of the data, double redundancy, split across the availability zones within a region within your cloud environment. And so it really allows for scale out and redundancy and uptime, and so behind the scenes, we'll take down 1 replica at a time for maintenance and updates. So that way you'll have constant connectivity. So I always recommend in a production environment, start with 3 shards and 2 replicas. You can start small and always scale up.
Okay, so if any other questions, guys, please drop into the chat. Maybe Adam, I will ask you just in terms of, next. I know that you love sending people like useful links, useful stories to read or videos to watch. So what will you share this time with people? I
think, I'd like to highlight some of the, the Uber use case. I think is a really good one where they switched to ClickHouse. We have a video that our CTO did back in July, similar topic, but about, more about how we dog food our own solution. I think that would be a good one to send to people. And then just, get our mail list and see our product updates. And, we've got an aggressive roadmap, and, we're looking for, I'll leave it there.
Sounds good. And if any one of you would love to brainstorm a little more how to build an observability, monitoring, logging, metrics type of solutions that work for your company, please feel free to reach out. Always happy to sit together and look into that, considering all our joint experience.
For sure. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Then it was a pleasure, Adam, talking to you. It was. We hope that it was useful for you guys. If anything else we missed or you would love to hear during these webinars, just don't hesitate to reach out again, and we're happy to be with you next time.
All right, thanks, Natalia.
Thank you, everyone.